Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Bantamweight Boxing Podcast. Pound for pound, the best boxing podcast around. Join with me, as always, are my three brothers. My first guest is a man who got his first break as an extra in Green Street. It's Joe Waite. Hi, Joe.
Stand your ground.
Stand your ground for sure. My next guest is a man who is so good at selling houses, he even managed to sell a 5-story house to Stephen Hawking. It's Jimmy Waite. Hi, Jim.
Good evening, everyone.
And my final guest is a man. What are you saying there, Jörn? Sneaking something in? Nothing. And my final guest is a man whose beard grows every time he chats crap about boxing. It's Johan Waite.
Yeah.
Hi, Johan. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Good evening, everyone.
Okay, so let's get these introductions out of the way and into the boxing news. As you know, we always do our free boxing headlines and then we'll get into our group discussion. This week, we'll be talking about the greatest boxing comeback of all time. So, comebacks. Anyway,
that was a good comeback there, mate. You recovered that.
I recovered from that first slip up, but let's get into it. So, the first headline, Chris Eubank Jr. claims that he has a strategy to defeat Canelo Alvarez. So as we know, Canelo Alvarez was actually set to face Billy Joe Saunders, but it doesn't seem like that fight is happening anymore. And Canelo is now looking for a replacement. And Eubank has come out and said that he'll take the fight. He knows something about Canelo Alvarez, clearly no one else does, and he thinks he can beat Canelo. What do you make of this, Jim? Do you think Canelo even knows who Chris Eubank Jr. is?
My money is on the Ginger Ninja, Alvarez all day long. Although, in fairness to Eubank, he's got the height advantage, he's got the reach advantage, but apart from that, he's not got much else over him. So I think I'd be interested to see the fight. I think it is a clash of styles. I think Eubank is a slick, speedy fighter, good combinations. Only 2 defeats on his record, have not been against unheralded opponents. So, yeah, it's a fight I'd like to see. I can't see Alvarez overly excited by the bout. I don't think it's going to garner much attention in the US where Eubank's profile is even lower there. So I can't see it being a big money spinner for him. But yeah, I think it would be an interesting one.
Yeah, I think it will be an interesting one.
I don't know.
Well, he has come a long way. I think you were crazy if you think if you bet any money on Eubank to win it. But, he has come a long way, Eubank, since...
well, he'll go a long way if he's fighting in America, just because he'll have to travel there.
Yeah.
That it was a clash of styles. I thought he meant style versus no style. That's how I see it as a clash of styles. And I hate to say that because, I'm a massive fan of Chris Eubank Sr., but that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think... the real disappointment is the fact that we're probably not going to see Canelo versus Billy Joe Saunders, which I think would have been a great fight. Yeah. But it looks like, something keeps going wrong anytime Saunders is about to get into one of these big money fights. So what that is, who knows? But yeah, it's a real shame. And I think this was probably Saunders is going to be his last big break, wasn't it? This big fight against Canelo to really show everyone that he is of a high pedigree. But doesn't look like it's going to happen. So let's move on to the next headline. And Evander Holyfield, who we were speaking about last week, actually, has come out and said that Tyson Fury would have done well in his era. Do you agree with this, Johan? If we were to, go back in time and drop Tyson Fury in the mix with, Tyson, Lennox, Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, the list goes on. Would he have done well?
The list goes on. Yeah, of course, without doubt, because of his size, if nothing else, in comparison to Holyfield. I think I would love to have seen Lewis versus Fury. I think that would be the best matchup of that 90s if you could drop Fury into the 90s. But yeah, of course he'd be in the mix without doubt.
Yeah, definitely. With that size alone, for sure. But yeah. Lennox versus you could imagine Tyson Fury against someone like Holyfield. The size difference in a fight like that would just be
huge,
incredible.
Huge.
But yeah.
But I mean, it's always difficult when you talk about that person in their prime and that person in their prime. You could talk for hours. You talk a lot of shit about who could have beaten who from now and from then. But I think, yeah, of course he'd be in the mix without a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so moving on to our final headline. Oscar De La Hoya is making a comeback, apparently, at £160. For you, Joe, is there anyone you would like to see Oscar fight if he does make this comeback?
Yeah, I don't know what it is all of a sudden with all these old fighters wanting to have another crack at the whip, but someone in the water over in the States. But yeah, there's a few fights I'd like to see him in. He'd get absolutely destroyed in most of them, but you said at 160, I'd actually prefer to see the Pacquiao. I'd like to see Pacquiao beat him up again.
Yeah,
no. Not at 160, but he's obviously put on a bit of weight since then.
Yeah.
But he couldn't knock about with the Golovkins and that. Maybe Chris Eubank Jr. Maybe that's who he should fight, not Canelo.
Or maybe Senior. But
yeah.
There's been a lot of this. Mike Tyson making a comeback, Holyfield making a comeback. I don't know if money's tight.
That's what happens when you lock everyone in. You lock everyone indoors for 3 months. They get fucking bored.
Yeah.
Exactly is.
Everyone's dying for a little scrap. But that's all the headlines. As I've said before, there's not a huge deal going on in the boxing world at the moment, but we try and make do with what we can. But let's get on to the big discussion. And as I said before, we're talking about boxing's greatest comebacks. So, Joe, I'm going to start with you to kick it off. Let's hear your boxer's greatest comeback.
Right. I've gone with boxing's oldest ever heavyweight champion of the world, Big George Foreman, who KO'd 26-year-old Michael Moorer in round 10 in Las Vegas to win the WBA belt at the age of 46. Yo, and what are you, 42? He can barely knock out.
I ain't even 42, mate.
40 on the dot. That's how impressive.
I'd knock you out. I'd knock you out.
I'd love to see it. I don't need to go into detail.
46, Joe won't be able to go to the toilet by himself, let alone become heavyweight champion of the world.
That's happened already.
Yeah. I don't need to go into detail about George Foreman's early career, but I'll take you back to March 1977, where he lost to Jimmy Young. And unlike the Muhammad Ali loss, that really humbled him. And he embraced the loss, so much so he became a man of God. You know, he said he had like a religious experience after the bout. He had like a near-death experience where he sort of found out about the fragility of life, whatever, all of that sort of philosophical shit that Michael and Johan like. And he became a preacher, an evangelist for a couple of years. He like set up a youth center, I think, done all sorts of good charity stuff. And then as what mostly happens with all these boxers, he then ran out of money, got fat. Yeah. And he thought, all right, it's time to make a comeback. So 10 years after he lost to Ali, lost the title to Ali, he vowed to become heavyweight champion once again. And then, he made his return. He took into account his remaining strengths, and he noted what his weaknesses were. He got in trainer Archie Moore, the legend, to sort of, give him, adapt his style so that he could still knock with some of the bigger guys. And that's exactly what he did. He sort of mastered that cross guard. You've seen like the crab sort of stance that he took.
Yeah.
It's brilliant to see. He was winning fights. He was knocking people out. And, people thought it was a joke at the start. They, he was coming back. The media were criticizing him and they were calling it, the punchers versus the preacher and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But then, he started to win fights, started to knock people out, and people were going, this is still George Foreman. Then at 42 years old, he landed the Holyfield fight. I'm sure we've all seen it again and again. Holyfield's 28 years old. I think this was Holyfield's first title defense, actually. They called it the Battle of the Ages, very fitting name.
Yeah.
And it was a brilliant fight. It saw Foreman go 12 rounds in a very competitive fight. I mean, he was behind on the cards on all of it. He definitely could have gone either way at points. They were both throwing big punches. And I think even in round 11 in that fight, if you see Holyfield, he goes back to his corner and he goes to his trainer, check my teeth. George Foreman hit him with a punch so hard, his whole mouth went numb, and he actually thought that he'd knocked his teeth out. So that goes to show he was still punching. He still possessed that power.
Yeah, I think. Sorry to interrupt, Joe, but I think with Foreman, he is the best example of the saying where they say about the power is the last thing to go, because it does seem like that with a fighter, and Foreman is probably the best example of that. Like even at that age, he was still carrying probably the same power he was in his prime.
I don't know. Exactly. As I've got old, it's been the first thing to go. To be fair,
you've never had power though, Johan. That's the difference. You couldn't knock out a wank, Johan, let alone a fucking person.
You can say that over Zoom or whatever it is.
Yeah, if I had the video camera on, I probably wouldn't be saying the same stuff. True. To be fair,
you can see my face right now. Yeah.
Sorry, Joe. Continue.
No, not at all. Yeah, and that was the end of that bout. Obviously, Holyfield took it in the end on points. It was much like that Rocky VI sort of fight, to prove he could still not with the big boys. But many people would have said that alone has a shout to be in this video. Just coming back and having that fight and showing at that age that he could still hang about with those lot. But then 3 years later, Michael Moorer came knocking. He'd just beaten Holyfield. He was a strong, slick, powerful southpaw. And he sort of saw what Evander Holyfield saw in fighting George Foreman. It's a very easy win, arguably, with a high-profile name, good for the resume. A bit of a tune-up fight in many ways. But big George Foreman, he had other ideas. And obviously, the rest is history. The fight went on, much like the Holyfield fight. Moorer very much in control. But then, you can see Teddy Atlas between rounds warning Moorer about George's punch power, saying be careful, but he doesn't listen. They're standing toe to toe, and I think round 9, Moorer's demolishing George Foreman. I think Foreman only threw 30 punches in that round, which is incredibly low. But then round 10 comes around, and he ups the ante, mate. He makes barbecues because he wants all the smoke. He's come out punching, and he put Moorer down with a lovely 1-2 right on the button. Many say his whole game plan was to just sort of tease him for a little bit and then really show him his power right at the end, convince him that he could stand toe to toe. And then the time came about where he just absolutely flattened him. And there it was. History was written there and then. At the age of 46, he became the heavyweight champion of the world. 20 years after Ali outsmarted him and smashed him to pieces, Foreman got his revenge in the form of Moorer. It was the last echo of what was, the greatest era of heavyweight boxing, I've got to say. But what a way to conclude, like, the golden age of heavyweight boxing with the Foreman, Ali, the Fraser. That, for me, no comeback comes anywhere near that. What a story, what a man, what a fighter.
Sure.
That is a great comeback, but I'm sorry, he eclipsed it with his grill. That is the ultimate comeback.
Yeah.
There is no greater comeback than that.
He made more money on the grill than
I'm not surprised at that at all.
Yeah.
No, that is crazy. 20 years later, or however long it was, to come back and do that in the sport of boxing. It's just insane, and it's a great story, to be fair. And it's reminds me a little bit of what we were saying, I think it was last week, about Vladimir Klitschko. I think a few of us have seen on Instagram and all of that, he is staying in perfect shape. Foreman did that, and is Vlad going to do the same thing? Is he going to come back and knock out the
It didn't do him any good against AJ though, did it? Being in great shape.
But he wasn't out for but he wasn't out for 20 years at that point, was he? But
I just can't believe that the youngest of us pinched Foreman, whereas I thought, well, that's for me being old. I can relate to it and I can get really passionate about how fucking difficult life is.
When you can barely get out of bed.
Well, this is what I mean. So I can put a bit of fucking passion behind it. Whereas I don't understand it, but there we go.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, actually, one thing I didn't mention, Jimmy had a lovely little fact in there last week, so I'll provide this week. George Foreman wore the same trunks for the Ali bout that he did for the Moorer one 20 years later. The same trunks.
Oh, nice.
Yo, and that doesn't give you not change your pants. But
that's a beautiful fact, Joe. But I'm going to have to detonate another fact bomb on this podcast. Not only in that fight, not only did he wear the same trunks, but he actually had Ali's trainer from the Rumble in the Jungle in his corner for that fight.
Oh wow!
Ooh.
If you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so that's a great one from Joe there. But let's move on to you, Jimmy. Let's hear your greatest boxing comeback.
It's 30 degrees outside. I'm about to raise the temperature up even further on this podcast. Greatest boxing comeback.
It was better the second time. It was better.
Yeah.
It was...
Greatest boxing comeback. Now, to be worthy of the accolade, greatest boxing comeback, you need to be the greatest. And Muhammad Ali was the greatest of all time. An Olympic gold
He's not
medalist.
talking about Muhammad Ali again.
And the first fighter to capture the heavyweight title 3 times. In 1967, Ali was the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world. He bravely refused the Vietnam War draft and was stripped of his title and license, costing him his prime fighting years of 25 to 29. Unlike most fighters, his comeback was not motivated by money. He was motivated by his desire to fulfill his destiny and reclaim his crown. On his return to the ring in 1970, Ali would redefine the sport and leave a legacy that would last the ages. His return was a story of trial and tribulations. His first major fight was a defeat to Joe Frazier, but Ali would rise like a phoenix from the ashes to defeat Frazier twice. The pinnacle of his comeback is without doubt the Rumble in the Jungle. Watched by a quarter of the world's population, and at the time, the world's most watched live television broadcast. 7 years after being wrongly stripped of his title, Ali would once again be crowned the heavyweight champion of the world. Going into the fight, Ali was the underdog, going up against the younger, more powerful and undefeated George Foreman, who had smashed both Joe Frazier and Ken Norton in 2 rounds, both fighters who had previously defeated Ali in tight bouts. Even Ali's own team were worried. His personal physician arranged for a plane to be on standby in Spain to take him for emergency medical treatment in case of a serious brain injury. They literally thought he would be killed. But Ali would prove all the doubters wrong and would knock Foreman out in the 8th round, completing not the greatest comeback in boxing, but the greatest fucking comeback in sport. And to finish it off with a quote for the fucking ages: float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, his hands can't hit what his eyes can't fucking see.
I love the passion.
That was brilliant, Eminem. That was lovely.
Yeah.
That was lovely. Yeah, no. Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, two of the greatest, and with incredible comeback stories in themselves. But yeah, no, that was brilliant, Jim. But let's move on to Johan.
Oh no!
Hold on, I'm not done yet. I'm not done
he's not
yet.
done. He's going to come back. Sorry.
Bow down and accept that's the best comeback of all time. There is no doubting. You know, you could talk about the comeback of his persona, how he was vilified and then became a hero, but you just in sporting.
Wait, Jim, haven't you had your 5 minutes? Fit it into your bit. Yeah.
Pipe down, Johan, or I'll come for you.
Well, I've made a mistake. I'll get on to my mistake in a minute. Because at first, when I was thinking about mine, I thought, oh, great. It's an opportunity to talk about Mike Tyson. And I love Mike Tyson. So at first, I was like, squat like a squash down Anthony Joshua and swaying with frightening speed and ferocity. A character as colossal and compelling as King Lear, sinning hard but saving our boxing souls with images of sublime brutality. As he put in his own words, the people of this society that believe I'm trash and scum. I'll be trash and I'll be scum, but I'll be angelic trash and scum. Tumbling like Lucifer in a blaze of trailing fists and floors, making people like Lennox Lewis and Mayweather look only half alive, only half aware of the terror and ruin wrapped round the fists of their triumph. The deafening whirlwind of madness must have had them all on speed dial, but only Tyson picked up the phone. So that's how I was feeling. I was happy. I thought, I fucking love Mike Tyson. But then I realized I pulled the short straw here, because this comeback, this is a guy who was actually a convicted rapist. So when I first was thinking about it, I was thinking about
you're defending a rapist at the moment.
Exactly. So I was thinking Buster Douglas, and I was thinking of that early career. I went back and I was looking at all of those early fights. 1987, James Bone Crusher, Smith, all of these fights. We all know them, right? The Pinnacle in 1988. When he's fighting Michael Spinks, etc. But then, originally in my mind, I'm just thinking about Buster Douglas and coming back from that, or the type of comeback. And it's an interesting story. And obviously, I mean, he's out for a really long period of time, which is very difficult for a fighter to be out for over 4 years and come back. And I mean, he beat Frank Bruno, and he beat Bruce Seldon for the WBC and the WBA. So there's a real comeback story. But then when I'd forgotten, when I'd realized that image of the glamorous thug and stuff, which I really enjoyed, and the great fighting in his early career, when you actually boil it down, actually to what happened to him, it's very, very difficult then to actually, for me to do my part tonight and say it's a memorable comeback because of what he's coming back from. So yeah, I kind of pulled the fucking short straw.
And see, I think you make a really good point there, but I don't think you've drawn the short straw. I think, even Muhammad Ali, he was, like many boxers, a flawed character. And there was times in his life where he held very extreme views. He actually attended KKK rallies. He believed in segregation. Now, I think this was partly born out of the extreme racism he faced. I think later in life, a bit like Mike Tyson, you go through that roller coaster and you become a better person for it. But if you go through anyone's past, there are always going to be skeletons in those closets. So I don't think that should take anything away from
that. One of the triumphs of thinking about Mike Tyson is the fact that when we're talking about comebacks, his life is a series of comebacks. I mean, the amount of obstacles this guy's overcome, and the life story, the way it's wrapped around some of his, up until his career, at least until '88, but even in the later career, where there's something extraordinarily compelling. And I agree with you, but when you look at the specific nature of why he was out of boxing for those years, it's very hard then to kind of like, oh, isn't it great that he came back to boxing and made a go of it, even though he no longer had his split with his coach, etc., Kevin Rooney and so on, and he just was not the type of fighter that he'd been before. Predictable. I mean, when he fought Lennox Lewis, I mean, he's just almost standing stock still.
It's a shell of
head
man,
movement,
isn't it?
predictable. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go too extreme. You could argue that he still had a lot of glimmers of the earlier Tyson, and also there's that idea that, well, it was only in the early 90s that he started to face really serious competition. You can read it lots of different ways, but I think if you just go on YouTube and you watch yourself a Resnick video or something like that, and you watch his knockouts and the way he carries himself, and the absolutely crazed, insane way that he conducted himself in the 90s in press conferences and pre-fight, that level of insanity is in itself compelling, and it's sad really, because it's enjoyable in a way to watch, to be horrified by what he's saying and how he's acting, but really, that's the real person. And sure, again, it's great. It's great that he seems to now be some kind of multi-millionaire making movies and smoking dope and making money out of selling it. But yeah, it's an interesting story, a very compelling story.
Yeah, well, I like the idea you're saying.
I just wish I hadn't chosen it for this specific. I wish it had been just looking.
I see what you're saying, because for topics where you could bring in Mike Tyson, there's probably a lot more where it'd be
you don't have to tread on dodgy ground.
Yeah, for sure. But I like what you were saying about his life has been a series of multiple comebacks, because you could definitely, and I think you were just touching on this now, but you could definitely even say that about his life.
From nightmares as well, real nightmares. I mean, he's faced, as ferocious as he appears in those press conferences, that level of ferocity has been directed at him for a variety of obstacles.
I read his autobiography, and a lot of his childhood was a lot of trauma, not only with other sort of kids bullying him, but the way his mum was with his stepfather and that sort of, and all these different partners that she was bringing home, and the way they treated him, and all sorts of people he got involved with from a very, very young age. And obviously Cus D'Amato came in and sort of steadied the ship, but even from then on, the lot of adversity he faced mentally.
I was going to talk about in his later life, where you know, even after his boxing career, you know, the huge periods of where he was completely broke and, you know, worried about going to supermarkets because he wouldn't be able to pay for his food in the trolley, and, you know, where he's come from there, and to have as we're saying, an established career now, and looking after himself, which is nice to see.
He faced things in reality that we all just have to worry about in our imagination. Things like Brad Pitt fucking his wife, right? For us, we might worry that shit might happen, but we know it's just that's imaginary. That actually fucking happened to Tyson. So it's like
props to Brad Pitt for having the bollocks to do that. That is unreal. Like
it gets worse. It gets worse. Brad, he actually caught. As far as I understand he actually caught Brad Pitt.
Yeah, I've heard that somewhere as well, but I fail to believe that Brad Pitt is still alive, if that is true.
There's what's the name of that other fighter that Tyson beat up in public and beat him up so bad he shit himself in public? So yeah, it is hard to believe. But if you spend any time on YouTube on sites that aren't just showing you the fights, the amount of contradictory information that you get about Tyson is crazy. And also even Tyson himself, not so much changing the facts, but he talks about his life in different, when he's in a different mood or a different place in his own life, it gives it a different slant. It's not lying or anything, but I mean, you get a different kind of feel of who he is during different interviews. It's incredible. He's an incredible guy. Absolutely.
Yeah, and very, very intelligent. I think it's underrated. He's painted as quite, you know, just a brute and a bit of an idiot. But if you actually listen to him talk, and a lot of things he talks about, he's actually very well read and has a lot of understanding of life. And as we say, he's had a different kind of perspective than anyone probably ever who's lived, to be honest, than Mike Tyson.
Yeah,
to have that
just
level
not very
of fame,
well spoken. That's all.
Yeah, to have that level of fame at, you know, what, 18, you know, 20 years old is, you know, just unheard of. But let's move off Mike Tyson, and I'll do my.
I think Mike Tyson's worthy of his own his own podcast episode. I have to say, there's so much.
Yeah, you could talk about Mike Tyson. But for hours. And to be honest, you could talk about Mike Tyson.
To be fair, Johan does that most nights to himself.
Yeah.
Usually it's just me. And Rummy's Corner on YouTube.
Rummy's Corner. You could talk about Mike Tyson.
Like, yeah, Rummy. Yeah,
I agree. Not even mention boxing. Like, you wouldn't need to even mention anything about his boxing career, and you could still have a full-on 3-hour conversation about Mike.
Yeah, you could read a biography of Tyson that didn't actually feature any of his fights. Just at the outside, what was happening in his life at that time.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, so I'll move on to my greatest comeback from a boxer of all time. I can guarantee before I start, it's going to be better than Johan's after that shit. I don't even know what Johan's argument there was, but I think it was.
Well, no, but like I said, I thought, it's a great opportunity to talk about Mike Tyson. I love Mike Tyson, and then I started doing it, and then I was like exactly like that guy, and then I can't remember that fighter's name, but that was me in the corner. I love Mike Tyson.
The Albanian super middleweight.
But then I realised I'd made a terrible mistake, and it all fell apart, and I was like, I'm just going to sit here and be honest and just say I've made a terrible mistake.
Although he was convicted, Johan, to this day, you know, he professes his innocence.
Yeah, completely. It's just an issue I don't even want to get into. I don't even want to touch. I don't even know how to talk about.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've gone for more of a modern one with Danny the Miracle Man Jacobs. And I'll tell you what, they don't call him the Miracle Man for nothing. At the age of 24, this man was diagnosed with cancer. He had a tumor apparently the size of a cricket ball growing around his spine. The tumor was apparently affecting the spinal nerves, which obviously send information from the brain to his legs. And the nerve damage was so severe that Jacobs became paralyzed from the waist down and could no longer walk. So right into his boxing career, I think he was about 6 or so fights in, he's hit with this horrible cancer, and there were fears that the tumor was going to continue to grow and that Jacob's life would be in danger. Apparently, when the doctors explained what was happening to Jacobs, they claimed it was like the tumor had a personal vendetta against Jacobs and was slowly growing and trying to kill him. Jacob underwent 2 surgeries, 25 radiation treatments, and physiotherapy. If only we had this kind of money for, we could also teach Johan how to walk. But it was seen as a miracle in itself that Jacobs was able to walk again. But even though he was able to walk, it was seen, boxing was completely out of the question. He was medically advised never to go back to boxing again. And the damage the tumor had caused in his legs and spine was so great that it would just be too dangerous to ever step back into the boxing ring. However, after a year...
Why couldn't I have just come up with a story like that?
Yeah. All you had to do, was type in greatest comeback on YouTube, and there would have been a documentary.
I know that's what I had to do. I know, but I love Mike Tyson. I've told you.
Yeah.
I'm listening now. It feels like you're telling me a Christmas story. It feels like it's Christmas and there's a film on, and it's all gonna end really well, and I'm loving life. And I'm thinking, why the fuck did I choose Tyson?
To be fair, I don't know what Christmases you've been going to, where you got cancer patients surrounding you. But,
when they recover. I've jumped in too early.
I haven't said he's recovered yet. Yeah, but
I know what's going to happen.
All right. Anyway, after a year and a half out of the ring, Jacobs made his return in 2012 against Josh Lutran, and won his fight with a first round KO. His slow climb back to the top had begun. 2 years later, he won the WBA regular title, which was, of course, a major achievement. And the story could have ended there. It could have been the beautiful comeback story. But as many consider the WBA regular title not really to be a world title, the story kind of continues, and he got his next...
That's a bit harsh for a man.
Isn't it? No, yeah, but it gets better. But the story continues, and he gets his big shot against Golovkin, the unified middleweight champ. Triple G, was an absolute monster at this time, hardest hitter, just absolute freak of nature. And Jacobs unfortunately lost a real narrow decision to him, mainly because he got knocked down halfway through the fight. And you think, again, the story's over there, but it's not. His dream finally comes true at the end of 2018 when he beats Derevchenko for the IBF world title. For me, there's no comeback which really comes close to this one. The only opponent that might be a greater victory than beating cancer is a 6-foot Ukrainian robot in Derevchenko, and he's done it. For me, that's one of the best comebacks to defeat something like cancer and then come back and get a world title. The movie's written there, and I'm surprised one hasn't already been made. But he continues to go in his career, and he's looking very sharp.
Yeah, he had a fight with Canelo, didn't he?
Yeah, he lost Canelo. But again, gave Canelo a very hard fight, and now has recently beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. So his career is back on track. But yeah, and it's a good time for Jacobs to be in the middleweight division. Like Golovkin, if he could get the rematch with him, I think he could do a job with Golovkin. Yeah, Golovkin's on the way out. Canelo, no point focusing on him. He's jumping up and down, fighting whoever he wants. But the middleweight division is kind of open for grabs now of who's going to be, who's really going to lead this into the future. And I think it could potentially be Jacobs. So yeah, but
it's an interesting one.
I'm not actually 100% sure how old Jacobs is. He might.
I can't remember his age either.
I'll double check now.
Yeah,
but,
it's an interesting story just from the sort of where the places come from. It's quite different to the other comebacks we've spoken about.
But that being said,
out of his control.
That being said, it's interesting as well that
he is 33. Sorry to interrupt. He is 33.
33, yeah.
He needs to take advantage now.
That's what I'm saying.
Anyway, hurry up, mate.
I think you'd be a shit promoter, Mike. You'd be like, right, it's your time now. You're 35. You're prime of your career. You're going to take over. And he's like, I'm ready to retire, Michael.
But what I think is funny about boxing is that we all recognise that the Danny Jacobs story could be made into a film, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting about boxing and the way people feel about boxing is that if he worked in a school or something, he was a teacher or he worked in an office, no one would give a fuck that he had cancer and came back to work. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you think of most other jobs, people just be like, he's come back to work. Oh, I thought he was dead.
Can't you? You can't fight someone in a wheelchair, can you?
That's true. That's
I think
true.
that's all we learn fights are people in wheelchairs.
Yeah.
No, but I see your point.
Wait, cut out. Did Joe just say all my fights have been in wheelchairs? How did he know? I got my own street beefs in wheelchairs.
If we're going to go into
what Johan means is every fight he's had, he's ended up in a wheelchair.
Yeah,
that's it. That's how it should end.
That's how you know it's been a good one.
That's how you know it's been fun.
You've got to come out like Rocky, isn't it? When you see the other guy in the wheelchair.
Exactly. Yeah.
Give them the nod. You can't speak.
When I was younger, I thought that's how all fights ended in the Rocky film, that they would all be in wheelchairs and they'd come out. That was just a standard thing that you did after a fight, and that you took that level of punishment.
Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Does anyone have a vote? Should we vote on what we think was the greatest comeback of all time? So we've got Danny Jacobs. I'm not even going to count Johan's for that one. So George Foreman and Muhammad Ali. So Johan, you kick off the voting with who you've got to go for.
You can't vote for
yourself. You can't vote for yourself.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's that vague, Jim. We weren't
I think that I want to say Foreman because I like what Foreman did as an individual. And similarly, Jacobs did something as an individual. He overcame something very individual. Well, if you can say that age is an individual, to be fair, but it felt like a personal overcoming. But Muhammad Ali, it's like everything with him, it's bigger. It's just bigger and better than everyone else. He overcame more than anyone else in boxing has overcome. It went beyond overcoming anything to do with boxing, bigger than boxing. He's a bigger man than boxing. So it has to be.
It was a vote, Johan. It was a vote, not a monologue. You get one opportunity in a podcast to do a monologue.
Yeah, but I feel strongly about it, right?
He's just speaking the fucking truth, Mike.
He's just speaking the truth. So I'm taking that as a vote for Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, that's a vote
for
Muhammad Ali.
For Muhammad Ali.
Mike, we're not on this podcast to take part. We're on this podcast to take over. Remember?
Yeah, I'm getting that feeling. I've got to start talking about Muhammad Ali.
Get the fucking program.
Yeah, Joe, over to you. Your vote for this for greatest comeback.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Danny Jacobs because I think that's just incredible. Ali sort of had his own demons, sort of what Johan was talking about, and he had to overcome almost what he put out in front of him himself. But Danny Jacobs had no say in that whatsoever, and I think that's to come back from that is just incredible. So Danny Jacobs for me.
No, definitely. And Jim, over to you.
I'm going to go with George Foreman. I think for any, Danny Jacobs' achievement is incredible, but I think what Foreman did is just on a different planet. You meet 46-year-olds on the street and you think this guy became the world heavyweight champion of the world at that age. It's just, that defies all belief. What Jacobs achieved is incredible, but I think it's just slightly eclipsed by Foreman.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap it off with a vote for Foreman as well. I think everyone has that image of Foreman at 46 for that 1-2 he has. He doesn't even throw it like from head high. He throws it from his waist, just a 1-2, and just dropping people at that age is just unreal. Another vote for Foreman. So well done, Joe. But yeah, well done to everyone. These were great comeback stories, and thank you everyone for listening, and goodbye.